Hello, thanks for tuning in. It's Joe Simhart here for another edition of Cults and All Culture. It's April 9th today, and I'm going to be talking a bit about my old group, Church Universal Triumphant, and how ideas in the old John Birch Society that formed around the same time that this cult did, run by Elizabeth Prophet in the 50s. So I'm referring to this book by Bradley Whitsel, a scholar that looked at the apocalyptic ideas and history of this cult, which culminated in the late 1980s and 1990 when the group had predicted that there was going to be a communist invasion and the world was going to change, and they all went, at least the main core of the group, went underground in this huge football field sized bomb shelter outside near Yellowstone in Montana. And of course they came out a day later from underground, well over 1,000 of them, and found that the world had not changed very much at all, except it was another day. But let me read you something about the paranoia and conspiracy ideas in the Church Universal and Triumphant from this book again. And in here, Whitsel says that Elizabeth Prophet's declaration of spiritual warfare against communism was not the only means by which she inculcated the church a sense of apocalyptic angst. There were at least two other representations of evil that were also used to justify an organizational strategy of calculated withdrawal from an impure outside world. The first appeared in the form of an international power elite said to be in league with the Nephilim, a Hebrew biblical term, the messenger meaning Elizabeth Prophet, often used to refer to those who were cast down from the heavens. This clique was regarded as an elite group of international power brokers that operated secretly in order to gain control of the world's major economic and political systems. Ascribing to this exclusive body a hidden agenda aimed at destroying democratic government, Prophet saw such organizations as the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, as agents of political intrigue bent on gaining global power. She felt that such groups were responsible for hatching a diabolical plot against the children of God, aimed at subjugating all nations to the authority of these figures and their banking houses. She also relied on a threat of extraterrestrial origin to further her designs on removing the church from the environing society. Anyway, that gives you a little idea of the extent of the paranoia of this particular church and the conspiracy, not only of dark forces within the governments and the power brokers on earth, but also in the heavens, the so-called Nephilim, or what the church also called black magicians. So this book, which I just finished, and it's a good read, came out last year, A Conspiratorial Life, and it's by Edward Miller, and it's about Robert Welch, the John Birch Society, and the revolution of American conservatism. And, you know, when you read this, when I read it, I was struck very much by the same conspiracies about the Trilateral Commission, the Illuminati, the Council on Foreign Relations, the world going toward globalism and modernism, erasing, our Christian American heritage, the melting away of the American spirit into some other nefarious postmodern idea of the human being. I mean, this is the kind of thing that Robert Welch was fighting against. And so I think what you find when you read the book is that Welch suffered from something called the overvalued idea. You know, it was something which bordered on paranoia and delusion, and at times may have been delusional. Elizabeth Prophet may have extended some of these ideas even further into a religious kind of delusion that she taught in her Church Universal and Triumphant, or as it's called, Summit Lighthouse, mostly today. But Welch was fascinating in his life, I hadn't known that much about him personally, and this book brings out all of the history. He was quite the genius when he was young. He learned languages quickly. He was learning algebra in grade school, maybe even before that. He just had a precocious mind, but it may have been rather stilted. He found his hero when he was trying to formulate his political ideas while he was a candy maker. He was in business with his brother that made candy, and they invented sugar daddies, for instance. And it was quite successful. They made some money at it. And he started this John Birch Society in 1954. Now, who was John Birch? I'm sure you can look it up, but let me just give you an idea. Birch was a Baptist ministry killed by the Chinese communists 10 days after the end of World War II, it says here. Birch was born to missionary parents in India. Birch was a disciple of Frank Norris, an anti-communist fundamentalist who directed congregations in Detroit and Fort Worth. Norris, in his newsletter, The Fundamentalist, assailed religious modernism and encouraged missionary activity, especially in China. So, both Welch and Birch were raised by fundamentalist Baptists with a strain of premillennial dispensationalism, which proposed that the Bible foretold the end of the world. Welch strayed from his religious fundamentalism. Birch did not. So that was the main difference between them. So later, Welch wrote his perhaps his most important book, The Life of John Birch, which is the foundation of the John Birch Society. So he had a lot of the same conspiratorial ideas as Elizabeth Prophet. For instance, we were told back in the day, in the late 1980s, not to drink fluoridated water. Birch also argued that fluoride in water was a government conspiracy in order to numb the minds and make people more pliable to communist influence. Elizabeth Prophet said the same thing. There was anti-feminist ideas. Birch called these neo-feminist feminoids, presaging Rush Limbaugh's feminazi, thought-terminating cliche about the feminist movement. And there's just a whole host of other things that I found interesting and revelatory about the foundations of my old cult and John Birch's ideas. So there may have been something in the air at the time about beleaguered conservatives. Many of them believe that despite Eisenhower being a great general and a Republican, he was actually more liberal and even a communist. Birch had called him in a private letter, a long manifesto of sorts. He had called President Eisenhower a communist. So, you can go anywhere you want with all that. It's crazy stuff if you want to take a deep dive into the Birch Society and believe in it. Even though it had this mission to reform America, the society itself began to fall apart. There were factions within it that didn't agree with one another. For instance, it attracted a lot of anti-Semites, and Birch wasn't comfortable with anti-Semitism. It also attracted a lot of racists, and Birch himself wasn't comfortable as an out-and-out racist. He felt that the civil rights movement was moving too fast and thus being taken over by communist forces. He didn't think that the status quo was that bad during his day. So he saw communist ideology taking over a lot of people like Martin Luther King, etc. Anyway, I just wanted to bring up the interesting parallel I found between Elizabeth Prophet and Mr. Robert Welch. Recommend the book. It's a good read. Thank you for listening.